Hello and welcome to a video all about length and power. We're here at a classic day ticket carp water to explain the differences in test curve and the different length rods you might use in different situations. Hopefully we're going to catch a few more fish like this, and we've got some sexy cork handled rods from Sonik to guide you through different lengths and test curves. So maybe you're a newcomer to the sport, maybe you're improving or returning to carp fishing after a bit of an absence, and test curves and lengths maybe confuse you because there's plenty out there at the moment, so you might not know what to choose for. Maybe you're sitting on the fence. Well, I've got three different Sonik rods with me today. They're lovely cork handle versions, and we'll talk a bit more about those in a moment. But what I've got here is I've got a 10-foot and a 12-foot rod. They're both 3-pound test curves. So what's the difference? What do those extra or fewer 2 feet give you or take away from you? First, let's start with test curve. People might not know what a test curve is. That is the weight, it's measured in pounds, that it takes to take the rod tip from its horizontal plane down to 90 degrees. So it's not the weight that will snap a rod, it's just bending it in half almost, so it's right to its maximum. And we've got two 3-pound test curve rods here. That might have been seen as fairly beefy back in the day, but these days with modern carbon technology, there's plenty of forgiveness, and a 3-pound test curve is a really good starting point. Lengthwise, now 12-foot carp rods have been sort of the standard for many years, but it wasn't always that way. It was Rod Hutchinson, one of the carp pioneers, who introduced 12-foot carp rods when he wanted to hit big distances with perhaps lesser technology back in the late 70s and early 80s. So we haven't always used 12-footers. There's now a big sort of fashion for 10-footers, and I think for the kind of day tickets that we're at today, we're at Gold Valley here in Hampshire today, a 10-foot rod generally might be all you need. If you're casting up to sort of 60-yard range, which is what I've got in front of me today, then a 10-footer might well be the best bet, especially when it comes to storing it, when you have to put it into your car or into your garage. But if you want that extra length, then that comes with certain benefits. You've got more elasticity, you've got a bit more leverage when it comes to casting, and we'll talk a bit more about the two 12-footers that I've got with me today a bit later on. So I've got a 10-footer in my hands here, 10-foot 3-pound test curve. Let's address the test curve first before we talk about the length. 3-pound test curve, as I said earlier, it's a good all-round test curve these days. It's not too beefy, so you're not going to be bouncing fish off in the margins with a poker stiff rod, but there's enough sort of meatiness in the butt to be able to cast. So if you're fairly new to carp fishing or you're returning after a break, then 3-pound is about that sort of average mark these days. And a 10-footer, why would you choose a 10-footer over any other length? I really like 10-foot rods. I was a convert to them when I tested a set of 10-footers a few years ago, and what I found fundamentally was they were more manoeuvrable. In tight swims, a 12-footer or even a 13-footer, you have to worry about that tip, you have to wonder what you're doing. Is that overhanging tree going to get in the way? With a 10-footer, a lot more manageable. It really does make a difference. Those fewer 2 feet really do feel nice and compact in your hands. And that translates to when you're playing fish as well. A 10-foot 3-pound test curve rod like this is great fun to play fish on. You feel a bit more connected, you're nearer the fish by definition, and it just feels a bit more fun, as I say. When that rod buckles over, you can feel it, you feel more of a connection. And it's a small thing, but with a 12-foot or 13-foot rod, for instance, that can feel a bit more distant, literally a few feet further away. Another advantage is that in smaller swims, right now I'm hoping to drop a bait in the margins, is that just creeping through small holes or just getting into tight swims, this swim is pretty open, so it's not a necessity. But I like the fact we've got a 10-footer here. I can just drop a bait off the rod tip and hopefully lay a trap that a fish will come and take. But I've already caught some fish on the 12-foot rods that I'm using today, so I'm going to show you some footage of me in action explaining why the 12-footers give you something else compared to a 10-footer. So this is the 12-foot rod. Obviously you get 2 extra feet over that 10-footer, and I'm fishing zigs today. It's a warm day as this fish charges off, and the fish are up in the upper layers, and zigs seem to have been the order of the day. This is one of a couple of bites I've had already so far this morning. And with zig rods, you're obviously fishing a longer hook link. And so a 12-footer definitely helps, not only with casting that longer hook link, this fish has woken up, but it also helps when it comes to landing it. You've got more sort of leverage. That lead, or the lead clip, hopefully if the lead has come off, isn't going to be jammed in the top eye of the ring like it would more easily on the 10-foot version. Now, the 12-footer also helps on a swim like this. It's not the most compact swim, but we have got a fairly large bush to the left-hand side. We've got some reeds to the right. And with a 12-footer, this is the 3-pound test curve, so this is perhaps the more balanced one, the all-round rod. What I've got is just extra length. If the fish darts down to one side, I've got 2 extra feet in which I can sort of peer over using the rod to sort of bring the fish back. So with a 10-footer, you're slightly restricted. The fish might dart left or right of you, and you can't really hook it round the side. But I'm going to get this fish in. Hopefully, it's a barbless only rule here, and I've got fairly light zig line, but hopefully we'll see this fish on the bank. So almost proof in the pudding, this fish had darted to the left just as I was talking about. I've had to move my left-hand rod just to be able to get a better purchase on it, but that extra couple of feet has allowed me just to have a bit more leverage as it's gone round to the side. So that's something to bear in mind if you're choosing what length of rod to use. Bear in mind what swims you're likely to be fishing. If you like this video, there is really no need to subscribe. We've got 50,000 now, so that's more than enough. But we do have a new TikTok channel where there's lots of outtakes and behind the scenes action, so do give that a follow. And if you dislike this video, make sure you bash that dislike button twice. So the specific rods we're using today are from Sonik. They're their Vader X RS cork handle versions. We've got 3 of them with us today, and I remember when I first saw the original Sonik Vader X range about 3 or 4 years ago, and I said in another review that I think at the time it was probably the best value carp kit around. Now the market has definitely got more competitive in that short time since, but Sonik have kept one step ahead by upgrading the Vader X to these Vader X RSs that you see here today, and I'm now going to run you through 5 things that I really like about this range. First up, plain and simple, it's got to be the price and the value for money. These rods across the range are under 70 quid, and just look at them. They look far classier and more expensive than that price tag would suggest. The playing action, this is the 12-foot 3-pound test curve, and it's got a lovely playing action. We've had plenty of fish today, and it's got just enough grunt to cast on your average day ticket like this, but it makes playing fish nice and enjoyable. You can't look at these rods without seeing that cork handle. Yes, it's a personal choice, but I love them. Looks good and feels great. One of my favourite elements of these rods is the integrated line clip. They're a useful tool for bite indication. They can help you differentiate between a liner and a proper take, and these ones are integrated so you don't have to buy a clip-on line clip. Some integrated line clips on cheaper rods can look like a chewed fingernail, but these ones are nicely made, nicely moulded, and they work really well and won't damage your line. Finally, it's got to be the looks of these rods. These look great, especially given their price tag. We've got some nice red detailing, that slim armoured carbon blank, and there's a nice carbon weave detail just where the Vader X RS logo is near the handle. These look far more expensive than they really are. So we got some action on the 10-footer as well as the 2 12-footers today. This is the 10-footer. I'm not sure it's a huge fish as it comes careering towards me. But on a water like this, you don't really need that casting power. And I can only really cast to 60 yards. That's as much water as I've got today. And the 10-footer is more than capable of doing that. With a 3-pound test curve, that's beefy enough for almost any day ticket water, really. And playing action, I just enjoy it. There's less carbon in your hands, it's easier to maneuver, as I've said previously, and when you're playing the fish, it's just good fun. As it hoops round, you're sort of more connected to the fish, and as I say, this isn't a huge fish, but it's been good fun today. We've had plenty of bites, and I'm going to bring this in now, and hopefully you've got some idea of the choices that can be made between 12 and 10-foot rods. So if you decided that a 12-foot rod is the one that you want to go for, then you've got to look at its power and its strength. And today I've been testing the 3-pound and the 3.5-pound test curve model. The latter is here in my hands. Now, why would you want 3.5 pounds in terms of test curve? Well, we normally measure test curves in quarter-pound increments. So this is effectively 2 steps up from that 3-pound test curve model. And so it's got more power and it's going to be a better casting tool. So if you're fishing waters where you need to cast, or you're fishing methods such as big PVA bags or heavy method feeders, which put the rod under a lot of strain, then a beefier rod, such as a 3.5, is probably the best one to go for. So it's distance and it's sort of those heavy rigs, that's where you're going to need that extra grunt from the 3.5. What that does mean is it's going to be a slightly stiffer rod. You might need to put a bit more welly into it to get that extra yardage on your cast. So do make sure you've got the technique to cast a slightly stiffer rod, and just be a little bit cautious when you're playing fish under the rod tip, especially with barbless hooks or long hook lengths, that this 3.5 isn't going to be quite as forgiving as the 3-pounder. But if you want distance and you want to fish heavy tactics or in weedy, snaggy venues, then go for that extra power. So it's been an action-packed day here today. We've had plenty of runs, probably about a dozen fish, I think. I've kind of lost count. And both the 10-footer and the two 12-footers have performed really well. What do you need? What do you want? Well, let us know in the comments what you're leaning towards and what you use in your own fishing. Today on a water like this, I haven't had to cast far, not using particularly heavy methods. The 10-footer is all I've needed, especially with that 3-pound test curve. That's a good all-round test curve for modern carp fishing, for singles and doubles like we've been fishing for today. But those 12-footers, they can come into their own. If you're fishing zig rigs, which I have done today, quite long zigs, that 12-footer does make them easier to land. And if a fish goes around the corner in a narrow swim, then you'll be grateful of that extra length. And if you're on a water that's perhaps bigger than this, where you're casting of 80, maybe a bit more than that, yards, then that 12-foot, 3.5-pound test curve rod is probably the one for you. There's plenty of choice, and these Vader X RS rods with those cork handles offer exceptional value for money.